Hi everybody, it's Tamara from Moogly and we are live. It is March 22, 2022, lots of twos in there. So thank you for joining me today. Recently on Moogly, I debuted the free pattern for the cottage bucket bag you can see right here. And it has right and left-handed stitch video tutorials already up here on the YouTube channel for Moogly. However, like a lot of crochet bags, I think this one would benefit from a bit of a lining. So I thought I would go ahead and line it for a live tutorial today. So there are lots of different methods for lining crochet bags out there and knit bags for that matter. So there's lots of other options. This is just going to be one way I'm going to do it today. I also have lots of tutorials and things like that on Moogly that might help you out. I have a nearly no-sew bag lining tutorial already up on the Moogly YouTube channel and on mooglyblog.com that I've linked in the link in the description for today. And that one will teach you how to actually take a piece of cloth and turn it into a bag that then you can then insert into a crochet or knit bag to sew in without having to sew that bag itself. To make that, you use something called heat and bond or stitch witchery. It goes by a few different names, but basically you can use an iron to sew fabric into a bag. You can take any fabric you like, where, just go to your local fabric store, pick up the salvage area is a great place to get fabric to line crochet and knit bags with because you typically only need a little bit. And you can find some really great deals if you go over to that section, but really any fabric that you like. Now, when I line a bag, whether I'm using a bag that I already have here, like I'm going to be doing today, I'm going to take a project bag that I don't need and use it to line a bag, or if you're using raw fabric and turning it into a bag, you just want to make sure that you choose a fabric that either isn't going to show through your crochet fabric or your knit fabric, or will complement it if it does. For me personally, I like a little bit of a design in my interior fabric. So for instance, with this fabric I have right here, you can see, like most fabrics, it's double-sided. It's got a side with the print on it, and then it's got a side, well, basically the back side. And I always try and make it so that the print shows on the inside of the fabric bag so that when you line your crochet bag, the print shows up and the non-printed side of the fabric, if you will, is against the outside of the bag. So let me pull this up here to kind of show you what I'm talking about. I've got a bag right here, got my fabric, and I would want the wrong side up against the outside of the bag. Again, with this particular bag, not so much of an issue, but with other projects, it's something to consider. So like I say, there's a few different ways to line crochet bags out there today. And I do have a tutorial for how to take fabric like this and this stuff and an iron, just your regular, iron that we should theoretically all be ironing our clothes with, right? And turn it into a bag that you can then line your crochet bag with. So I already have, like I say, that tutorial up there. And if you don't want to use this, of course, you can use a sewing machine or hand sew it. But today what I want to do is something a little different. I'm going to be taking a project bag that I have. I have quite a few of these. This was an extra one I have. I don't even know where I got this one, honestly. I think it was probably a free gift with purchase or something along those lines. Unfortunately, it didn't have any labels or tags on it other than it's made by Eco Bags. But I'm going to go ahead and use this project bag to line our cottage bucket bag today. There we go. The strap keeps getting caught on the edge of my table. Oh, there we go. So this is what I'm going to be demonstrating today. The basic idea, even though I'm starting with a pre-made bag, the basic idea is the same. We want to put our bag in our purse and just use some hand stitching to sew it in place. So to that end, of course, I'll be using some Coats thread and a sewing needle. And of course, you also need scissors. Another tool that I like to recommend for hand sewing, totally optional, again, linked at the link in the description, is this Clover needle threader or the needle threader of your choice. Especially as I get a little bit older, it's getting harder and harder to thread these little thread needles. The yarn needles are still fine, but these thread needles are getting a little tricky. So something to help you thread your needle is always helpful. And then, as I say, of course, some scissors. And you may find that things like needles to sort of hold your bag in place might also be handy, especially if you're doing a larger project. So basically, that's what we're going to be doing today. That's our quick intro. Again, there is already a free crochet pattern and stitch tutorials for the right and left-handed versions of this bag up here on the channel. But now we're going to be lining it. So with all that said, I need to hit refresh on my little laptop here so that I can see if you have any comments or questions as we are live as we're recording this. So let me just get that through here. So, hey, everybody, thank you so much. I see a bunch of comments already, so thank you so much. Okay, all that said, long intro. Let's go ahead and bring in the overhand camera and talk a little bit more here about what we're doing specifically. So, okay, here is that bag. Like I say, coffee, crochet, sleep, repeat. No idea where I picked this one up. It doesn't have any logos or anything on it, but it's a fun bag. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and use this bag to line this bag right here. There's our cottage bucket bag. It's about the right size. It's a little bit bigger, which is good. It's not going to be smaller than this. And it's going to go ahead and fill up this bag. You can see this bottom of this bag has sort of a round shape to it. And this one, of course, is sort of just a straight flat seam. So having a little bit bigger lets it sort of fill up that round space. So we got to do a couple things here to prepare. First things first, I'm going to go ahead and go back to my bag, and I'm just going to go ahead and take this handle off and get it out of the way. I love the handle. I love using it, but right now for the sewing portion, it's driving me a little crazy. It keeps getting caught on the edge of the table, so we'll go ahead and pull that off. The other thing is I want to go ahead and open this up a little bit so I can make it easier for me to sew. But I don't really want to pull it out all the way because I want to be able to sort of use it as a guide. If I sewed my lining above this right here, that would be fine. Or I could sew it below this, that would be fine too. But I don't necessarily want to sew it over this. I don't want to sew it in the same row as my drawstring. I think it would just kind of get in the way and might end up accidentally sewing through and around and just creating a little bit of a mess. So I do want to open this up as much as I can right here to make it nice and big so it's a little easier to get into my bag. But I want to keep it in there so I can sort of use it as a guide. And today my goal is going to be to sew my lining right underneath that drawstring. I can definitely see an argument for sewing it above the drawstring too. I want to put it below though, because I like the idea of being able to change out my drawstring when I want to. And I think if I sewed my lining in above that drawstring, that would be really difficult to do. So just lots of little factors that when you make your own bag, you can customize it, sort of adjust that however you like. So however you want, whatever your plans are for your project, whatever project it is, just kind of give it a little bit of thought before you start sewing in your bag lining so you can kind of decide if you want where exactly in the bag you want it to be sewn in. So all that said, let's set that aside and come back over here. Now, I thought a lot about this because I kept thinking, I've got a drawstring on this bag, but do I want to leave the drawstring on this so that I can actually sort of double seal my bag? And I think that would be a really fun option, but I don't think it's what I'm going to do for this particular project. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just take this drawstring on out. And I could, of course, just cut it. But I see here, this one should be relatively easy to just go ahead and pull right through unless they've sewn it in. No, they haven't. All right. So now I can set aside this nice bit of cording for a later project. And now I have a bag. Now, why did I choose to use a pre-made bag? Like I say, you can absolutely use the Heat and Bond or Stitch Witchery or whatever iron project you want to make a bag. But this one, I've already got it. It's already made. What I love about it, it's already got all the seaming done, so I don't have to worry about my fabric coming unraveling. It's got some really nice seams already in there for me. And I just love that it's got this really fun saying inside so that now when I open up the bag, we'll see this on the inside of our bag. So to do that, of course, remember when we were talking about our fabric, we want to make sure that our design faces the right direction. So before I sew this in, I'm going to go ahead and turn it wrong side out so that when I insert it inside my crocheted bag, of course, the design is what I see when I open the bag up to use it. So I'll go ahead and sort of punch those corners out here. Just get it nicely wrong side out. All right, there we go. Now this one has a sewing label in it. Thank you, Eco Bags, for the great bag. Again, not sure where I picked it up, but thank you. I am, however, going to cut it out. Sorry, guys, I'm going to cut out this label. I don't want it adding any bulk to my bag, so I'm just going to trim that right on up. It's organic. That's nice to know, but that's coming out too. There we go. So we'll just set those aside and get those out of the way. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start seeing where I want to fold over the top of my bag here. You can see this bag I'm using is a bit taller than the bag we're lining. There we go. So you can see that. So I'm going to need to fold it down a little bit. So I'm just going to start by inserting it in the bag and getting a feel for it and making sure that this feels really good and that it fills up the bottom of that bag. So I know it's kind of hard to see, unfortunately, that what I'm doing here, but I've got my hand inside 2 bags right there, and I'm just pushing and using my hand to really scooch it inside and make sure it sort of fills up that space inside. Basically using my hand to squish it around and make sure it's really nice and big, and that I don't have any empty pockets here, you know, over on the side, so to speak. Now that gives me an idea of how much space I've got here. I can see that it actually lines up with the top of this bag really nicely. So what I can do is I can feel, this is very unscientific, as you can see, I'm just feeling right there is where my drawstring is. So if I make sure, yep, that's down at the bottom, right about at the top of that coffee is about as high as I could go. Now I've got a choice. I could actually make my fold a little lower, but then I lose the coffee saying rather. So I'm going to make my bag, my interior bag for this a little bit bigger so that I can catch my whole saying. Again, totally up to you. Now that I know where I want that fold to be, I'll pull that bag back out and set aside the crochet one. I realize I've got, should I go ahead and trim that one off? You know what? I think, yes, since we're folding that over, I'm going to go ahead and trim this tag off as well. I'm just going to trim it real close to the seam. Nothing too fancy. And then what I want to do is just fold this right over like this, right to where I want our line to be. And then I can just take my bag and straighten it out and get that. Basically, our hem is what we're creating right here. We're making our hem. The fabric itself is already hemmed, which is great, so we don't have to worry about it coming unraveled or you adding any French seams or anything fancy like that, or doing any serging for those who do so. You don't have to get crazy with it. We just fold it over. It's already sewn. Now we have a nice ready to sew in bag, already pre-made. Love that. So with the bag made and with our crochet bag, of course, ready for the lining to be added, we need to get our thread on our needle. Hard time not saying yarn. It's so natural for me to say yarn. I keep trying to say yarn. So you can see here, I have matched my thread color to my bag color. Now, conveniently, this also matches my lining color, but when we go to sew in the lining in the bag, we want to do our best to have the thread not show on the outside of the bag. We're going to try and kind of skim along those stitches, almost as if you're weaving in ends. When you go to weave in ends, how you don't want that yarn to show through to the other side or to the right side of your fabric typically. We're going to be doing the same thing with our sewing thread. That said, sometimes, as we all know, things can peek through. So I would recommend, if you have to make a choice of which to match your thread to, match it to the outside bag more so than you would match it to the lining itself. So if you have to make a choice, match it to the bag so that way if it does peek through, no harm done. Nobody will be able to see it and they won't actually see it peeking through. So there is my little tip for that. So let me go ahead and get this thread on our needle here. I really do love little tools like this that make it easier for me to thread my sewing needles. With this one, you simply lay the thread over that little slot right there, put your needle down in there with the eye down, and then hopefully when I push down on this number 2 lever, sometimes it takes a couple tries. Doesn't want to work for me today. Figures. Since we are live, of course, it does not want to work. Normally this works beautifully, but it looks like I may have actually bent my needle last time I used it. So we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. Typically, I recommend using those, but today it does not want to work for me. So we will attempt to get this needle threaded live, which is really not cooperating. And that is the one fear I had, is that I wouldn't be able to get the needle threaded. So Jeff, if you would do me a big, big favor and go over to my array of drawers and grab the drawer that is labeled needles. We're going to try this one more time on here. And if that doesn't work, I may need a new needle. Sorry about that, guys. Always a challenge. Usually this thing threads them beautifully, but I think this needle itself may have gotten damaged. So let me pick up one of my many other packages of ancient needles. You guys are seeing all my secrets now. Look at this old package. I don't know when it was manufactured. It was made in Elizabeth, New Jersey. This was a needle packet that belonged to my husband's grandmother. That will tell you how old my sewing needles are. Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Now we're using a little bit of a bulkier yarn today, so I'm actually going to go ahead and pick a little bit bigger needle. I think this one will be easier to just go ahead and get threaded. Sewing needles, just like your crochet hooks, come in lots of different sizes. So sometimes just switch over to that bigger one. It makes it a whole lot easier. There we go, finally. All right. Did not expect that to be the hard challenge today. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up here. I know it's hard to see because it's thread, but I'm getting basically my thread doubled on my needle. We don't want to work from the thread like we would from a skein of yarn. We do need to go ahead and cut it and get a knot there in the end. I know it seems pretty basic if you've sewn before, but it's always a first for somebody. So I've got the ends of my yarn here, or excuse me, of my thread. See, I always say yarn. Ends of my thread here held together, and I'm just going to put a couple of knots in there to make sure it's nice and secure. There we are. So thank you, Corrine. Corrine says she loves my sweater. Thank you. It is the Batwing Lace Sweater. Another free pattern on mooglyblog.com. There we go. All right, so I've just tied that knot over a few times so it's nice and secure. And then I like to go ahead and trim off those thread ends just a little bit closer to the knot. All right, so you can see we've got our thread doubled on our needle. Those ends went somewhere, so we'll shake them off here so they don't end up inside our bag. And then, since our lining here sort of has a design to it, I want to kind of sort of center it. I think I want it so that it shows up opposite, so that if you're going to the front of the bag, it shows against the back. So that's how I'm going to enter it. So I've got the front of my purse right here. I'm just going to lay that down. I've got my bag turned wrong side out so that the design will show on the inside. And I'm just going to insert that straight on in. I'm going to try and maintain that folded hem. If you wanted to, you could pin it down or sew it down if you want to be fancy. I'm not going to be that fancy today. And we're just going to push that lining all the way in there. Oop, make sure you keep that hem and push that right down below the drawstring or wherever it is that you want to sew in your lining. There we are. It's not the most elegant motion, but there we are. You can see now that is in there right underneath, right where I want to sew it in, like so. Alrighty, so now all we need to do is get our thread and start sewing them together. Always a little awkward, so you'll want to take your time. We are going to start and just take our needle with our thread here, and I just want to start right in the middle. I'm just going to go down about 1/4 of an inch or so. And I'm going to come from behind until that little knot snugs up right against there. Then, this is always the fiddliest part, and there's just no rushing it. You just got to take your time, get a good look at it, lay it out, feel your stitches. You can feel the round that this is worked through. We want to make sure we go beneath that so we don't accidentally sew through our drawstring and then it won't work. And then just line it up right about where you want it to be. And we'll get our needle again. And I'm going to start taking some stitches. Now, this is the tricky part. Well, there's so many tricky parts, but at the same time, they're very simple. But you want to pay attention as you go to insert that needle. I'm going to be doing what's called a back stitch. You can see I've got my thread coming out here. I'm going to go to the right because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you want to go the opposite direction. And I'm just going to pop up there on the other side. So the thread's coming out of the middle. I go to the right and have it exit there on the left. But I want to look back here and make sure that and feel it as I'm sewing and make sure I'm not popping through with that needle. And if I am a little bit, That's why we want to make sure that we have that matching thread. And we can just pull that stitch right down there. From there, sort of straighten out our yarn because we've got a fuzzy yarn here. Make sure we're still in the right spot. So then I'm going to come back. See right there where it popped out before, where my needle came out. That's where I want to go in now. And then pop up again on that other side. Just like so. And again, I'm feeling I've got my hand back here on the back of my fabric, and I've got my finger right there feeling for it. You'll see I don't have my pretty nails on today. You have to look at my natural nails. It's a whole lot easier to do this sort of sewing maneuver, I find, when I have the very short nails. So if you're struggling a little bit, I know that always gives me a little trouble as well. So basically, we're just going to take our time. With each stitch, we want to line it up a little bit. And with some yarns, you don't have to, struggle as much. You don't have to fold the yarn down and look at it, but with this one, we do, and that's okay. So now that I've got a few stitches in there, and it's not going anywhere, it's always a good idea to go back and check and make sure. Is this in the right spot? Am I lining up okay? One thing to note, unless you have a bag with very specific dimensions and you are perhaps a seamstress, I am not. My bag, just like this pre-made bag, typically doesn't end up exactly the right size for the crocheted bag. I usually have a little extra fabric in there, and that's the way I like it, and that's okay. So if you find that that's the case as you sew, you can add little gathers. You can occasionally, and I'm going to wait till I get past these words, you can do just a little fold as you sew down those bits as you need to, just to make sure that you've got room to get all the way around the bag. Just make sure that if your fabric is stretchy at all, this one isn't, but some crocheted knit fabrics, as you know, can be very stretchy, that if they're very stretchy, that you're not stretching out your fabric too much as you're sewing this on tightly or holding it together and then sewing that so that it can't stretch. You want to really sort of make sure, wiggle the fabric as you're sewing it on and make sure that each stitch is landing where you need it to and that you're not creating a tightness in your crocheted or knit fabric that is going to interfere with its use. So hi everybody, thank you so much for the comments. All right, so let's come back here. We're going to just, again, take our time and line it up right under there. And then continue our back stitch. This is called back stitch sewing or back stitch seaming or back stitch for embroidery. We just go back to where the thread came out before. And we basically are putting our sewing needle kind of through the yarn itself. This is a very unique yarn. Different yarns will feel different as you go through them. Difficult yarns will be more difficult to hide your sewing stitches in, and others will be quite easy. I think this one's going to be pretty easy to hide our stitching in. But there's another, if your fabric is a little bigger, if your fabric bag is a little bigger than your crochet or knit bag, you can always just pull a little tighter on that seam as well, and that will create a little bit of gathering there. Just make sure, give it a wiggle and make sure it's not interfering with the lay of your crochet fabric as well. Otherwise, this is about it. It's just a matter of taking your time and working your way around. There we go. It doesn't have to be a really difficult thing. I know some people do use their sewing machines to sew in their bag linings. If you're using a sewing machine, the thread absolutely will show through both sides of the crochet or knit fabric. So in that case, you definitely need to make sure that your thread matches your crocheted fabric. It can be done. A sewn, of course, a machine sewn seam is much finer typically than a hand sewn seam, at least much finer than my hand sewn seams. So it can look good, but it needs to be a really solid crochet or knit fabric typically. And of course, it helps if you have some sewing experience, because sewing, anytime you're sewing on a non-standard fabric, it can be a little extra trickier with a machine. So you'll want to practice a little bit. If you do decide to do your lining with the machine, I would definitely recommend that you take some extra crocheted, like your swatch from your project, and a little bit of that fabric, and that you practice in that machine as well. Because the last thing you want to do is spend a bunch of time crocheting or knitting something beautiful, and then you go to line it, and that's the step that ruins the whole project. So you can see as I go around here, now that I'm past the word, I'm letting that fabric gather up a little bit, just making sure it isn't pulling on my crocheted fabric. That one, just a little bit of an extra fold there, a little extra pleating. There we are. Alrighty, so now let's take a look and see from the outside. I can feel from the inside, right there is actually where my seam is. And you can see between sewing, sort of skimming inside the yarn itself as I sew and making sure that the needle matches the yarn itself, that seam really is completely hidden. And since it's underneath my drawstring, I'll still be able to use my drawstring. Basically, we just continue to work our way all the way around the bag. When you get back to where you started, it's like finishing off any other sewing project or knit project or crochet project for that matter. You do want to use knots, unlike with your yarn. You'll want to make sure to knot your thread just as you did at the beginning, and just get all the way back around to where you began. If you do not like the way your lining is going and you need to take it out, you can use something called a seam ripper, or you can just use your scissors and actually cut the thread if need be. Unfortunately, you can't really frog, or unstitch sewn thread normally. That just doesn't work out very well. I mean, maybe somebody can, but it's definitely not a talent I have. I have to just take it out. But if you need to, then you can just go ahead and cut the threads for that seam, take your bag out, take a deep breath, maybe put it in timeout, and reapproach it the next day. Because yeah, it can be time consuming, and it is a different skill. It's not something we typically learn when we learn to crochet. It's a skill that comes a little bit later. So if you've already been doing some sewing, it might be easy. But if this is your first sewing project, absolutely feel free to take your time with it. Now, I talked a little bit about making sure the bag fits to size. A good clue for this one, it's got seams on each side, so I can make sure that those are just lining up here with the side of the bag, and that will tell me. If I move back down here, there's that hem. I've got a little bit more gathering here to do, but that gives me a little bit of an end goal. Now, of course, with fabric, actual sewn fabric, we can't use our stitch markers to hold the fabric in place. But if you have some actual safety pins, this is where actual safety pins can make great stitch markers, because you can use those to pin right through your fabric, and then through your crochet fabric to hold it in place as well. The same way normally we would use a stitch marker for. With the sewn fabric, actual safety pins are going to be a better idea. They also make straight pins, of course, for sewing, which are normally used for seaming. But for a project like a bag, where you're going to be sticking your hand in and out essentially like that, I'd recommend using the safety pin. I think it's going to save yourself a lot of ouchies and owies later on as you continue to sew. You're going to end up poking yourself, or at the very least, we'll say, I know I would. I would definitely end up poking myself. That I know for sure. So I'm going to, since I don't have a safety pin over here, just going to continue to eyeball it. The great thing is, it is the inside of the bag. So if you don't love the inside as much as the outside, nobody else needs to see it. But as you continue to crochet bags or knit bags, I do recommend that you try lining them on occasion. Again, it's a skill like any other, and you may not like your first lining as well as you like your later linings, and that's okay. But it is a good skill to have, and it is a good thing to be able to do to your crochet and knit bags, because it really can make a difference in how the bag is able to be used. So right now, there we go. Sometimes you'll notice when you're sewing, your little threads want to separate like that, and one doesn't want to pull through. So it's a good idea to pay attention as you go, because if you miss one of those, it's really hard to fix later. As you can see, sewing is not my primary area of expertise, although it is probably one of the first crafts I did learn to do. Albeit not nearly as well. But anyway, so let's see. Yeah, definitely, if you want to sew your own bag lining, I would definitely say that part you want to do with the machine if you want to sew it. I wouldn't necessarily try and hand sew the actual bag itself, but sewing it into the crochet or knitting, I think, as Chris points out, is a little bit easier. Could I have turned your bag inside out to make the sewing line easier? You know, I could have, but then I would have had to keep checking the inside to make sure that it wasn't showing on this side. So I'd kind of have to be flipping that fabric back and forth. It could be an option. I think that typically the lining is a little bit smaller than the bag, so that can cause, you know, some fitting issues. But if it works for you, absolutely. No wrong answers. Whatever works for you, give it a try. Give it a try. I don't think this bag's quite the right size to squeeze this one into, but I think with a thinner bag fabric, that could have worked. That would probably work a little better. And maybe with just a different lining bag, it might have worked a little better as well. Just double checking to make sure my side seam is still lined up with my side here. There it is. And we're coming up close to it already. And that means we're already actually a quarter of the way around this bag lining. So you can see it takes some time, but it's not the longest thing in the world, especially if you can use a pre-made bag, or like I say, use the Stitch Witchery iron-on stuff to create your own custom bag. And in terms of making the bag size to fit inside, if you are making a custom one, like I say, I always like to make mine a little bit big. I like to make sure I have a little extra room in there. Some people probably swear by making them a little bit smaller. And no matter how close and exact I try and make it, it's always just a little bit off anyway. Again, seamstress, not my primary skill. So you can see I added quite a few gathers here as we came around. I kept my word straight, personal choice, personal designer choice here, but I gathered a little bit so that the side seam of this bag was sort of basically match the side seam of my crocheted bag. So I know I'm sort of lining myself up as I work the rest of the way around the bag, but I've still got nothing showing here on the other side. So yes, you would definitely need a special presser foot to handle the thickness and a special needle to prevent snags, as Chris points out, particularly for this yarn. I genuinely don't know if I would attempt to machine sew this particular yarn. I would definitely try it out with a small swatch of it first to see how it goes, and possibly with someone who knows to sew better than I do on hand as well. So I'm running out of thread. Now this will happen to you probably too. It is really tempting, and I know because I've done it myself. It is really tempting to cut a giant length of thread when you go to sew something like this in, because, you know, it's just like knit and crochet. Who wants to weave in a bunch of extra ends, right? The problem with that is you can see how thin thread is. It has a real propensity for getting tangled and knotted up on itself. And the longer the section you're working with, the more likely that is to happen. So I really don't like to go more than maybe 4 feet total, 2 feet working length once you've got it doubled when I sew, because it prevents stress in the end. Like I say, it's annoying to have to stop and tie off and start with another piece sometimes, but in the end, it's going to save you so much of a headache. So we've worked to almost the end of this bit of thread, and I'm not going to get too close to the end because I've learned that lesson the hard way as well. That's never fun. And you can see here, I'm just putting more knots in. I want to knot this really well up against the sewn fabric. That's going to be our most solid thing to work against here. We can push our finger right through that crochet fabric if we want to, so we really want to rely on the fabric to hold that thread there. So there we are. So then we will just trim that off. And that just blends right in. And then, of course, we would rethread our needle and pick up right back again right there and continue on around. So let's see. I don't know. I'm not sure if this will fit, but we'll try it. I haven't done it this way before, turning it wrong side out. I don't know if this bag will fit, but we're going to give it a whirl. If I have to take it out and put it back in again, I will. It might. It might. Let's see. I like the idea. We'll try it out right here live. Might have been easier, too, to do before I started sewing it together. But, oh, gosh, you know what? It might fit. I think it might fit. You guys, that is a great tip. Thank you. Okay. So let's see. You have to be careful now. Okay. So right now it's making this bag tight and this bag loose. And before I was needing to gather this bag in order to get it fit well in this one. So that may affect how things line up. So let's see here. I'm going to straighten it out like that. Right there. I think I think as long as you just take your time, maybe flip it back and forth a few times as you go to make sure. But I think it should be okay. So I take it back. Turn it wrong side out if you want to sew it on there. Give it a whirl. Just keep checking to make sure it's not going to show through. And make sure as you sew too that it's not doing anything funny to your gathers. Flip it back and forth, maybe every quarter of the way around, or when you run out of thread, you need to start your next section of thread. But I really like that idea. Thank you so much for speaking about that, you guys, and encouraging me to give it a try. I think I will probably try the next section of this from the outside here, and then we'll see how it goes. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and test it out. Let's not leave us hanging. I want to know too. We'll cut another little bit of thread here. And now where did I put my needle? There it is. And we'll see how the sewing goes. See if it seems easier to me. I say this stuff with crochet and knit all the time too. If it works for you, then it works. If you like the finished project you're getting, then it's all good. As long as you like it and it fits and it does the job that you want it to do. So I'm just prepping my new thread here with my nice vintage probably 40s needle, 1950s. I wish I could find a date on it. It's such an old package. There we are. Alrighty, so now let's pick it up and see how this works from the outside. Now we've got our bag inside our fabric. You can see still there really well. Just trying to feel, because there I needed to gather. That's the only thing that's on the back of my mind. I may need to do some gathering from the outside, so we'll see how that goes here. I want to make sure we don't accidentally end up sewing down over that toggle as well. Make sure everything on there is now on the inside, excuse me, is pushed out of the way. And then we'll come from behind our fabric again. And I'm just going to eyeball about another stitch out. There we are. And then we can pick right back up with our back stitch. Line it up. You can see the peak of that drawstring right there. So I'm going to do a few stitches here back in our back stitch. So there's, I don't know why I'm counting them. We don't need to count them. This isn't crochet or knitting. It's just a habit. Don't need to count your sewn stitches, thankfully. But we're just going to, it is a lot easier, I will say, or at least a lot easier to do it on camera from the outside. That was part of the difficulty of the angle on that one. Just want to make sure we do have a little extra fabric here. I don't create some looseness when the bag gets turned right side out. So may need to do a little bit of gathering here on the outside as well. That's okay. But yes, I can see both ways. Both ways are pretty easy. This way is definitely easier to get on camera. So definitely thank you for that. We'll see here when I turn it right side out, if there's any difference, if we can tell when it is the correct way around. But I just want to take a few more stitches here so we can get a good comparison going. Let's see, maybe one more. There we go. Okay, and then I'm just gonna put that right there, so hopefully I won't stab myself. Make sure none of our stitches are showing, so that's good. Then let's try and turn the whole thing right side out again and see if there's any difference we can tell. Sort of a live experiment right here today. Very exciting. All right, I'll get that needle back out of the way. All right, and so from the inside, it looks like it's gathered actually quite nicely. So you know what? Whichever way works for you. If you like to do it with the bag on the inside as you sew, if you like to turn the whole thing wrong side out, I think either way is going to be, honestly, I'm just double checking. Sorry here, as I'm talking to you guys, double checking, peeking inside and making sure. Yeah, I think that's going to work. I think that's going to work a-okay. Just keep a close eye and make sure that you're getting enough gathering there. That was my only concern. I might have to do a little extra gathering here on this section, but once it's inside the bag and it's all finished, basically, you can see, oop, right there, that is what that will look like from the inside. And now the bag will be lined. Nothing will fall out if I do put tiny things in there. And this will provide just a little extra structure and stability to the bag as well, keeping things, you know, from poking or staining or possibly injuring the crochet in any way. So that is the basics of how I'm sewing in that lining. And I think I might try and take some more of those stitches from the other side. So yes, thank you so much, you guys. And thank you on several levels for tuning in and joining me for this today. I hope that this helps you line your own bag, whether it's from the inside or the outside, and whether it's the cottage bucket bag or a different bag. Sewing in a fabric lining can seem really intimidating, but as you can see, it doesn't have to be. You're just basically putting one side bag inside another bag, and those stitches, they don't have to be really complicated. Just a simple back stitch works really well, and it's on the inside of the bag. If you want to, then you can also add fun things like pockets and other organizational, you know, little sections to your bag. If you are someone who sews, you can have a lot of fun with how you line your bag. And of course, if you don't have a project bag you want to use, do check out that nearly no sew lining tutorial that I have here on the Moogly YouTube channel. I've also got it linked in today's link. Using this stuff and just a regular iron is such a great way to create a custom bag if you don't have a sewing machine. Because like I said, you don't want to necessarily use this. You can use a sewing machine to sew the bag in the crochet bag. You're probably going to do that part by hand. So if you don't have a sewing machine, if you're not somebody who sews, definitely pick up some of this stuff when you get your fabric, and then all you need is your regular household iron. So that should cover it for today. I'm going to keep on lining my bag. We'll go ahead and come back to the other camera. All right, there we go. All right, so thank you so much for joining me, you guys, and thank you so much for working that through with me. I think this is going to be, frankly, an even better tutorial for everybody, hopefully, who comes and watches it afterwards for all your tips in the chat. So thank you very much, Chris and Gloria and everybody who joined us today, Jill and Elaine, everybody, Crochet Me Pink, thank you. I thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around. And hopefully I will see you on mooglyblog.com and in our next live. And hope you have a great day, everybody. Bye.